Hey, it's Mega, aka the Art Messiah, here to save you from your art sins. Welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about design and creating unique designs in your artwork. And so we're going to be looking into drawing mechs because I think it's a good practice to learn what design means and what design language and what design shapes kind of are. So if this is something that you've struggled with or want to get some more info about, definitely stick around for the video, and I'll kind of be sharing my thought process and a little bit of the behind the scenes and how I come up with this kind of stuff. So this is going to be the start of a new video series, which is basically going to be a weekly vlog of the stuff that I'm working on for my comic. And for those of you that don't know, I am creating an online web comic called Ignition, and it's basically about engineering and mechas and just a whole bunch of other cool stuff. So in order to develop a lot of the IP, which is the intellectual property, I'm having to do a lot of concept design. So today I really wanted to jump into mechas, and this entire week was kind of a journey into that. So if you are kind of watching and looking at what I'm doing right now, I basically start off with just a really quick rough sketch for this first process, and at that point I'm just trying to develop some like form and shape. Nothing detailed, nothing specific yet. You're just trying to basically make a silhouette of the design, and there's a few different things that I'm thinking about. So if I'm trying to make a more bulkier, more strong looking character, or in this case a mech design, I want to use a lot more square shapes because that represents strength. You basically have three shapes to choose from. You have triangles, circles, and squares. Squares kind of represent strength. Triangles kind of represent almost kind of like mystery, kind of like sharp angles, and they kind of represent maybe being a little bit more like an edgier type character, and circles kind of represent something that's a little bit more soft, something that's a little bit more friendly. So those are your three basic shapes, and then obviously you can kind of combine those to create a unique character. So this one was just a practice from a mech that I found on ArtStation, which again is a great website to find a lot of inspiration and reference to begin your own designs. So after I figure out the sketch, I go in and I block in those shapes with some different values. I'm working primarily in grayscale for two reasons. The biggest reason is that I really want to focus on design and composition. So basically the contrast between values, it needs to be readable and needs to be strong before you add in any color. So this is kind of like the beginning step. So after the shapes are blocked in, I kind of go in and again refine some of these shapes, adding in a little bit more detail, still being loose with it. But as you can see, this is a very iterative process. You know, you're not starting off with the final design or the final details, right? You're working from big to small, and that's how I always approach drawing. And it pretty much takes off or takes away some of the, let's say, what is it that I'm trying to say? I guess it kind of takes away that fear of beginning, because if you're trying to create this masterpiece right off the beginning, it's a little intimidating. So by breaking it up into these smaller steps, it makes it a lot more manageable. So after I block in the shapes, I'm blocking some of the detail. You know, I'm just coming in with a little bit more line work here and there. And you know, at this point, you're just trying to think about how to make things look visually interesting. And I'm really thinking about where do I want my eyes to be drawn. So I use the white as basically the covering for all the internal mechanics. So those are going to be my big organic shapes that are really giving this this picture its sense of design. So another thing to note, and I'm going to start doing this with the other pictures, is to not work super zoomed in. Even with this, I'm not really working zoomed in. And as you can just see, I actually pulled out to keep on working on this. If you're too zoomed in while you're working on your picture, you're going to be focusing in on the detail and you're going to lose the big picture. So even when you're adding this stuff in, even when you're adding detail in, you want to make sure that the entire image is reading. So I always zoom out my image, about as you see here, and I keep on adding in, you know, the details, the internal workings, and all that kind of fun stuff. So I just take a darker brush and start, you know, not being really precise about it, but just loosely getting in the details that I want. And then here I'm going in and making some adjustments, making some things darker, a little bit easier to read. And again, zooming back out, I'm always making sure that it's very clear and easy to read. And the reason I did a study first was because I wanted to see if the style that I'm working in, how useful it will be to convey designs and mech. So I really wanted to see how to use value to do that. So I think it came out pretty successful, and so I used this style and this technique to work on some other mech designs, as I'll get into a little bit later. So yeah, at this point, it's really fun just to go in and start to mess around with details, being really loose with it. And it's kind of therapeutic. All the heavy lifting is kind of done at this part. You're pretty much just experimenting and playing around with the brush and, you know, just going in, finishing up some final details. But that's the easiest part. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and use that same style. We're gonna go ahead and make a bunch more mech ideas. Still studying shapes right now, but when it comes to design, it's all about the silhouette. So that's what I always start with. And again, you wanna start really loose and you wanna start with those big shapes. Those small details come way later. So basically, I like to set a background first. I don't like to necessarily work on a white background all the time. So it's almost like drawing on like a chalkboard by starting with a darker background and then using a lighter color to etch in the stuff. And for me, I don't want to use something that's high contrast because this is the point in time in which you're exploring. So if you're working on paper, I encourage you guys to use markers or to use a really light pencil. And even to like, I've heard this technique from, I think his name is John Park. You basically kind of mess up the page first. You kind of draw on some scribbles. So that way your mind isn't thinking like, oh, I have to make something perfect. Your mind is already in this place of, okay, I'm just problem solving right now. I'm trying to come up with interesting shapes, interesting designs, and you're not worried about the placement of details. And this is something I struggle with. I have to constantly like remind myself to like always take a step back, always like to go and I want to think about details, but at this stage you really want to be super loose about it. And one of the issues that I have so far is that I keep on zooming in, and so I just need to constantly remind myself to work quickly, to not slow down. One thing that helps me is to have like a timer set, and it's kind of like a reminder to speed up, to look at the big picture and not get caught up in like the minute details. So that's something that really helps me out. Obviously every artist is gonna have their own approach, but I just want to share mine. Of course mine isn't the gospel. This isn't necessarily the correct way to do it, just the way that I like to work. Okay, so again, I'm working really small. As you can see, I drew in kind of like the silhouette, and now I'm going in starting to block out some shapes I think would be interesting. And again, I use the white as pretty much like the armor for all the internal mechanics. And so I go through all the designs that I have made so far, and I kind of do this process. And I hope you guys can see how loose this is at this point. So the one on the top left is a study from something found on Pinterest, which again is another great resource to use if you're coming up with designs, because you can just learn. And then the one that I just blew up, this was straight from my mind. So I really liked the designs and some of the shapes that I was coming up with, and it looked a little bit unique to me, so it's something that I want to explore a little bit further. So I go in and I start detailing it in just a little bit more to get a better feel for it. I also really want to stress when coming up with designs, mech designs, try to come up with a lot of ideas. When I was creating those silhouettes, I didn't just create one silhouette and then go through the process. I created like 6 silhouettes to start, right? So you want to give yourself a lot of ideas to work off with. And while you're doing that, you're really observing, and this is where style comes into play. You're observing what shapes you really like and why you like them and what feelings it kind of gives you. So always take into account when you're studying your references. Don't just copy it, figure out what are the shapes, what are the design language that they're using that really stands out to you. Okay, so I'm going back to this one again, studying, just looking at the shapes, observing how even just like the internal like working parts, like what kind of lines do they use to represent the mechanics of it. So I study that and I come back to my own drawing and I start to apply the things that I studied, and I detail more of the character. So I really do want to know what you guys do in terms of design process. What really helps you come up with unique characters? What references, what resources do you use? I really want to hear about it. I just want to explain and share my process because I'm always iterating on it. I'm always getting better at it. I'm always trying new things. So anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned a little bit about watching the process. I'll be back with a little bit more in-depth, maybe tutorials about how to break some of the stuff down, and to give you like individual tutorials on how I create the internal, how I create the armor, all that kind of fun stuff. But I wanted to give you a general overview of the process. So hopefully that's helpful. Tune in next time. Check out my other videos for how to make comics if you're interested in that. And until next time, peace and love and deuces.